I want half of everything. Her car, her 401k, her savings, her tips, everything, my ex-husband Marcus said flatly to his attorney, as if he was discussing the dissolution of a partnership of equals rather than the destruction of the life I.D. built while he watched sports and complained about his job. His lawyer, a man named Gregory Walsh, turned to look at me with barely concealed contempt, the kind of look that communicates without words. This will be over quickly, and your client is about to lose badly. We were sitting in the mediation office of the Nashville family court surrounded by pale blue walls and the hum of fluorescent lights. About to divide up the assets of our 15-year marriage, and Marcus had shown up with the confidence of someone who believed he understood the situation completely. My client's wife appears to work as a server at a casual dining establishment, Gregory continued, shuffling papers with the casual certainty of someone who never met me before and had made assumptions based solely on Marcus's casual comment that I worked at a restaurant. My divorce attorney, a woman named Catherine Torres, pulled out a folder and slid 3 documents across the table toward Gregory without saying a word. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe, like, and share this story, because what happens next will absolutely destroy you. My name is Morgan Elliott. I'm a businesswoman, a former waitress, and someone who learned that keeping parts of yourself private, even from your spouse, can save your future. Marcus and I met in 2007 at a restaurant where I was waitressing. I was 24 years old, living paycheck to paycheck, working double shifts to pay rent. Marcus was a customer who came in regularly, charming and attentive, always requesting my section. He tipped well. He made me laugh. He made me feel seen. We started dating 3 months later. He told me he was a middle manager at a logistics company, making around $85,000 a year. We got married in 2009. We had a daughter in 2011. We had a son in 2014. By all external measures, we built a life together. But what Marcus didn't know, what I never told him, was what happened at work. In 2008, while I was still waitressing, I met the owner of the restaurant where I worked. His name was Tom Mitchell, and he was 71 years old and planning to retire. Tom had built his restaurant into something special, a farm-to-table concept before farm-to-table was trendy, with a devoted customer base and strong profit margins. The restaurant had been operating for 37 years. Tom also had no children and no one to pass the business to. His ex-wife had remarried and moved to California. His siblings had no interest in the restaurant industry. He was facing the prospect of selling his life's work to investors or a restaurant group that would strip it of its character and convert it into something profitable but soulless. One day, while I was cleaning up after my shift, I was working 70-hour weeks at that point, splitting time between 2 restaurants. Tom sat down and asked me to sit with him. He'd closed out his register and we sat in the empty dining room, and he told me something that changed my life. He said he'd been watching me work for 6 months. He said I had something special. I understood the business intuitively. I treated customers like guests in my home. I trained new servers with patience and clarity. I solved problems without complaining. I had a vision for what hospitality should be, not just serving food, but creating experiences. I want to teach you the restaurant business, Tom said. His voice was serious, almost reverent. Not as a server. Not as a general manager. As a businesswoman. As a potential owner. Starting tomorrow, you're going to work behind the scenes. You're going to learn the supply chain, the vendor relationships, the financial management, the staffing strategies. You're going to understand what it actually takes to run a restaurant. And if you're serious, if you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked, we're going to build something together. I was 25 years old. I was married for 1 year. No one had ever offered me anything like this. No one had ever believed in me the way Tom was believing in me in that moment. I started working at 5 a.m. to learn the business before my evening shift started. Tom taught me everything. Profit margins. Food costs. Labor ratios. Vendor negotiations. How to read financial statements. How to identify what customers wanted before they knew it themselves. Over 3 years, I became Tom's trusted lieutenant. I ran daily operations while Tom handled strategic decisions. I learned how to read profit and loss statements. I negotiated with vendors and suppliers. I managed payroll and scheduling. I handled customer complaints and corporate partnerships. I became, in effect, the operational heart of the business. In 2011, Tom asked me to buy into the restaurant. He offered me a 40% ownership stake for $150,000, significantly below market value, he said, because he valued our partnership and wanted to ensure the business stayed in hands that cared about its character. I'd saved $100,000 from aggressive saving and working double shifts, from every tip saved, from every paycheck carefully allocated to a separate bank account that Marcus knew nothing about. Tom financed the remaining $50,000 at 0% interest, which I paid back within 3 years through business distributions and personal savings. I never told Marcus about the ownership stake. This was the crucial decision that would change everything. This was the moment I decided to build something that belonged to me alone. Here's why I kept it secret. I was watching Marcus closely during those early years of marriage, and I didn't like what I was seeing. I noticed he didn't have financial ambition. He wasn't interested in building anything or improving himself. He was satisfied with his job, satisfied with our standard middle-class existence, satisfied to coast. But I also noticed he had very specific opinions about my work. He wanted me to focus on the kids and not work so much, even though his salary wouldn't support that lifestyle. He wanted me to be available when he wanted me available, to prioritize his comfort over my ambitions. He made comments about the sacrifices he was making to support me, even though I was making far more money than he was. I recognized in him what I recognized in my parents' marriage, a man who would have believed that my work was secondary to his work. A man who would have expected to benefit from my success while simultaneously resenting it. A man who would have felt threatened by a woman who earned more than he did, who had bigger ambitions, who was building something he didn't understand and couldn't control. So I made a decision that I kept to myself, a decision that seemed radical at the time but became increasingly sensible as years passed. I would build my business quietly. I would not tell him about the ownership stake. I would keep that part of my life separate. I would protect my future by acknowledging the reality of my present. It wasn't deception exactly. It was strategic silence. It was self-preservation. Over the next 14 years, the restaurant grew. Tom retired in 2015, and I became the primary operational manager. I expanded to a second location in 2017, a third in 2019, a fourth in 2022. By 2023, I had built a restaurant empire with 4 locations, combined annual revenue of $8.6 million, and an estimated business valuation of approximately $22 million. Marcus had no idea. He knew I worked long hours. He complained about it. He suggested I cut back so I could focus on our family. He made comments about how much he'd sacrificed for my career. But he never asked for financial details. He never asked about ownership structures. He assumed, based on what I told him, that I was a general manager making around $110,000 a year. The truth was that I was a multimillionaire business owner. When Marcus moved out in January 2024 and filed for divorce, he believed he was divorcing a woman who'd made around $110,000 annually in a salaried position. He believed my assets consisted of approximately $200,000 in savings, a 2019 Honda, and a modest investment account. He believed he was entitled to half of nothing particularly valuable. His lawyer, Gregory Walsh, entered the mediation process with the confidence of someone who believed he had an easy case. Catherine Torres, my attorney, had advised me before we walked into that mediation room. Morgan, you need to show him your tax returns immediately. He's going to make demands based on false information. Once you reveal the true scope of your assets, the entire negotiation changes. I know, I said. I'm ready. Catherine had guided me through this process over the 6 months since Marcus filed. We'd prepared comprehensive financial disclosures. We'd had the restaurant chain valued by a professional appraiser. We'd documented everything meticulously. We'd structured the financial documents carefully, with extensive detail but presented in a way that was legally ironclad. When Gregory pulled out those 3 documents and saw what was on them, the entire room went silent. The first document was my tax return for 2023. It showed business income of $8,600,000 and net personal income of approximately $1,400,000 after business expenses and reinvestment. The second document was the professional business valuation of Mitchell's Restaurant Group, valued at $22.3 million as of December 2023. The third document was the corporate structure showing that Morgan Elliott held 51% ownership of the company. Tom Mitchell held 25%, he was in semi-retirement but still received quarterly distributions, and the remaining 24% was held in trust for my children. Gregory's face went pale. He actually set the documents down and didn't say anything for approximately 15 seconds. Marcus stared at the documents, his expression cycling through confusion, anger, and then a kind of desperate realization. What is this?" he said finally, his voice small. Catherine responded calmly, "Your wife doesn't work at a diner. She owns a restaurant empire. She's been building this business the entire time you were married, and she chose not to tell you about it." The mediation broke down almost immediately after that. Gregory asked for a recess. He and Marcus had a heated conversation in the hallway. When they came back, Gregory's entire demeanor had changed. He was no longer contemptuous. He was careful. He was professional. He was negotiating with someone who held vastly more power than he'd realized. The divorce that Marcus thought would be a quick financial win became a nightmare for him. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, which means assets are divided fairly but not necessarily equally. The court evaluates factors including the length of the marriage, the earning capacity of each party, the contributions of each party to the marriage, and the financial circumstances of each party. The judge assigned to our case was a woman named Patricia Henning, and she was deeply interested in understanding how the marital property had been structured. Catherine presented evidence showing that I had built the business during the marriage but had kept it separate from marital assets. The initial $150,000 investment had come from money I'd saved before the marriage began and through aggressive personal savings during the first 3 years of marriage. The subsequent expansions and growth had been funded through business reinvestment and bank loans taken out in my name only. The business had never been commingled with marital assets. However, Judge Henning ruled that while the initial business investment might not be marital property, the significant growth of the business during the marriage, particularly the expansion to 4 locations, had occurred during the marital period and therefore represented marital income that had been reinvested in the business. The judge calculated that approximately $6 million of the $22.3 million valuation represented marital property that would be subject to division. Marcus was awarded $3 million as his portion of the marital assets. But that was before we discussed ongoing support obligations. I was earning approximately $1.4 million annually from the business. Marcus's income was approximately $85,000 annually. I had 2 children who lived with me the majority of the time. The court awarded child support of $8,000 per month, until the youngest reached 18, and alimony of $12,000 per month for a period of 10 years. In total, that was approximately $2.4 million in support obligations over the 10-year period. So Marcus walked away from the marriage with $3 million in marital asset division, plus $2.4 million in support payments, plus significantly increased visitation and time sharing of the children. He was better off financially than he'd ever been in his life. And he was furious about it. What angered Marcus more than the financial settlement was understanding the deception. In his mind, I had betrayed him by keeping my business success secret. He felt emasculated by the revelation that I was worth far more than he'd imagined, that I'd been planning my financial future without him, that I'd deliberately withheld information about my life and my work. He started telling people that I'd hidden money from him, that I'd been dishonest about my career, that I was a gold digger's mirror image, someone who kept wealth secret to avoid sharing it. But the truth was more nuanced than that. I hadn't hidden money. I'd hidden knowledge. I hadn't been dishonest, I'd simply not volunteered information. I'd made a calculated decision to keep parts of my life separate because I recognized early in our marriage that Marcus would not be a partner in my success. He would be a beneficiary of it, a resentful beneficiary at that, but not a partner. The difference between me and many other women in similar situations is that I had the confidence and the opportunity to make that choice. Most women don't. Most women who are building businesses while raising children and managing marriages do so with their spouse's knowledge and involvement. Most women don't have the option to separate their professional success from their family's collective assets. But I did, and I took it. After the divorce was finalized, I returned to my restaurant offices and my children, and I continued building my business. I expanded to a 5th location in 2025. I negotiated a strategic partnership with a regional food distributor that reduced my costs significantly. I launched a private label food line sold through specialty grocery stores. My business grew even more. Marcus eventually remarried. He remarried a woman who made approximately $95,000 annually, and he stopped making public complaints about our divorce. He sent child support checks on time. He was cordial during custody exchanges. But I could see in his eyes that he'd never stopped processing the shock of discovering in a mediation room in Nashville that the woman he'd married, the woman he'd believed he understood, was far more powerful, far more successful, and far more self-determined than he'd ever imagined. What I learned from my marriage to Marcus is that women are often punished for their own success, not always through law, but through expectation. The expectation that we will share our accomplishments with our partners. The expectation that we will be transparent about our ambitions. The expectation that our success should enhance the family status, not threaten the husband's identity. I refused to live under those expectations. I built my business in the shadows of my marriage, not because I was ashamed, but because I needed to protect my future. And when the marriage ended, I was in a position of strength rather than vulnerability. I don't regret keeping my business secret. I don't apologize for the strategic decision to separate my professional success from my marital relationship. And I don't feel guilty for the fact that my divorce settlement reflected my actual earning power rather than the false information Marcus had been operating under. My name is Morgan Elliott. I'm the owner of Mitchell's Restaurant Group, which operates 4 restaurants across Tennessee generating $8.6 million in annual revenue. When my ex-husband assumed I was a waitress and demanded half of everything, he didn't understand what he was asking for. He didn't understand that the woman he married had spent 15 years building something extraordinary while he slept. When the judge saw my tax returns, the entire dynamic of the negotiation changed. That's exactly how power works in divorce court. You're only as powerful as the assets you can prove. And I could prove everything. My ex-husband's lawyer went silent when he realized what I'd built. And that silence, that moment of realization that he completely miscalculated his position, was more satisfying than any amount of money could ever be. I didn't need his money. I never did. I needed him to understand that I was never the woman he thought I was. And now, he knows exactly who I am.